You are listening to Radio Ramadan 365 podcasts.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. This is Reflections at Radio Ramadan with your host Zubair Akram and our respected guest Shaykh Ruzwan Muhammad. In this program, inshallah, we've been, as people who've been following it, you know that we've been exploring the deeper meaning of approaching the Quran, not just as a book we recite, but as a revelation that we live. And in our previous sessions, we've reflected on Surah Al-Fil, exploring its historical background, the powerful reminder of divine protection, divine justice, divine promises, and breaking the resolve of a mighty force and protecting the house himself, the Lord himself. And then discussion with Shaykh Ruzwan on Surah Fil moved on to Surah Qureysh. And we kind of labored on the point that as if these two surahs are one, if not just a very perfect pair, one moves on to the other. One can't be understood before we understand Surah Fil. Surah Qureysh can only be understood if we know what Surah Fil is about. And Surah Qureysh, three important concepts so far. I would say ilaf, rihla, and then why the use of when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asks the Quraysh to take heed. It says فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ, and how the importance of the Lord of this house. Inshallah, we'll be unpacking some of it today, and we will move on to what Shaykh Ruzwan had asked yesterday in a session to bookmark, which I have. Let's start with فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. Assalamu alaikum, Shaykh.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So Surah Quraysh, and you know the logical move from Surah Al-Fil to Surah Quraysh and Ilaf, and now فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ.
Yeah, so you want me to continue on?
Yeah.
So I'm interested in the bookmark. I can remember the bookmark. As long as you keep remind yourself of it.
I had a pen and paper yesterday, so I just jotted those 3 points.
Okay.
I've bookmarked them.
Okay, so we were...
That'll be towards the later half of this program, inshallah.
Okay, fine. Okay, whatever that is. Surprise then. Yeah, so we're at the point where in the narrative of Surah Al-Fil, the chapter of the elephant, and the narrative of that and the way that we've gone through it, and we've basically taken stock of also this concept of ilaf, which is the kind of safety, tranquility, and peace that the Quraysh find themselves in, not of their own making, and also the contractual privileges that they've been given. All of that is like, in Arabic, you call it a khabar. Khabar is basically information, it's narrative, it's something that you're given, that you're not told to accept or reject, you're not told to do anything, you're just told to listen. So the story of the elephant is a story. So you listen to it and you say, okay, that's interesting. And there might be lessons in it, there might be points of interest, there might be historical instances within it which pique your interest as well. And also, Ila fi Quraysh also is just a statement of fact. It's a statement of the way the Quraysh found themselves, and the reason for that was this ability that they were given to create contracts and agreements and settlements with neighboring tribes and empires. That's all information, khabar. And at no point is there any call to action, as they say. You remember, in marketing, there's always this idea of...
COT.
Call to action, CLT.
CTAs.
Whatever you call it. Point is, you want to sell chocolate, you tell them how amazing it is, you want to be cool, eat this chocolate. It's like, when I remember when I was a kid, a Mars a day I'm sure they don't have Mars anymore, do they? Mars a day, not do work, rest, and play, which in all counts, not, you can't say that now because it's mis-selling, isn't it? But the point is, they, at that point, marketing was quite primitive, so it would just tell you, you know, what the jingle is, what the idea of what they're trying to sell is. There would never be a direct call to action. A call to action being, okay, so you'll find it at your nearest store, or you need to purchase now. So a call to action now on the internet is much more brutal now, as you'll know. Marketing is all about, this is what we do, or this is your problem. This is actually how marketing works. This is the problem you have. This is the solution we have. And this is the call to action. This is how you can sort it out for yourself. 3 simple steps. So this is your problem. This is our solution. And this is how you can get it. So the call to action is, you know, call now or press this button, enroll, or whatever it is. So it's very simple. And it's very primitive as well. It goes down to the most basic survival mechanism that we have in our deep psyche, which is to do with, we're hungry. That's the food. Get it. So the call to action is always very important. So in the Quran, the interesting about the Quran is it varies in I mean, this could be a book in and of itself. If you could bookmark this for me.
Okay.
You could create a deep dive search of the Quran in terms of call to action, in terms of how it calls people to action. Like sometimes the call to action is just a piece of reflection. أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبِلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ. Like, I'm just off the top of my head, do they not reflect upon the camel, how it's created? There's a call to action which is to reflect. And the reflection is not telling you to get anything, but the reflection will lead to humbleness in front of God. It will lead to this appreciation of the creative capacity of your Lord. It will create this wonderment in the way that God has made every single piece of creation have a specific function, like the lashes of the camel, the hump of the camel, the ability to regurgitate food, and all these things. The more you go into it, the knees, the actual humps, the feet of the camel, all these things will be points upon which you will then reflect. Even its distance from the sand, in terms of its leg structure and how it's very, very thin legs, but how its main body is elevated, allowing aeration between the body and the sand. So the call to action there is reflection, which leads you to accept that there's a creator. In the Quran, there's all these things, but sometimes it's very direct and sometimes it's not. One of the most obvious ones that your listeners will know about is Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, when Allah says, "O you who have attained to faith." The moment you hear that, Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu said that be careful that when you hear Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, O you who have attained to faith, O you who believe, this is calling you to action. This is calling you, and you have to sit up and you have to take notice and look at what the call to action is. So every time Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu, there's always a call to action. Ati Allah wa ati Rasul, obey God and obey the messenger, wa ulil amri minkum, and those that are in authority amongst you. There's always a call to action. In these 2 chapters, there's not been a direct call to action, but there's been a call to reflection. So, أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ فَعَلَ رَبُّكَ بِأَصْحَابِ الْفِيلِ. Do you not then think and ponder over how your Lord dealt with the companions of the war elephant? So right away, it's engaging with you to think. And the engagement to think is actually an indirect call to action. Sometimes an indirect call to action is actually much more powerful because it's not a ready meal. Like, if you nowadays you get these companies that send you boxes. I've just seen them. I've never tried them, but they give you want to cook something, it'll give you everything in portion, every small bit of garlic, ginger, herb, just enough for that meal, which is very wasteful in one way. But you're given just the right amount of rice, just the right amount of meat, spices, condiments, just to make that one meal. And the marketeers there say that there's the reason why that model is successful is that the person has to engage in making the food itself. So there's a engagement and there's a agency, which is a kind of inclusion of you in the meal making process, which makes it partly more enjoyable and also apparently makes it more tasty, because you essentially you're getting ready to consume the food that you think you have made. So there's this kind of self-congratulatory mindset that you have, that you've partaken in the creation of the meal, and therefore, then it's more. And this is the same with the Quranic text. The more that you are engaged in coming to a conclusion, the more you have ownership of that process and the conclusion itself, and the more you own the conclusion as well. So somebody says to you, there's only one God. If you say, okay, I accept, there's no ownership of that at all. Like if you're born a Muslim and your only experience of Islam is that you're a Muslim because your parents were Muslim and culturally you're a Muslim, you've never had real ownership of La ilaha illallah, of there's no God but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There's only one entity worthy of worship. As opposed to a person who spent their whole life thinking, reflecting, going to different religions, different traditions, different thought processes, different ideologies, and in the end, discovering it through trial and error. And then when they have that conviction, it's a conviction they've owned. So it's theirs. You can't take it away from them. It's like Salman al-Farisi radiyallahu anhu.
But there's a danger there, isn't it? That are we all equipped to get to the correct conclusion? Arriving at conclusions from the reading of the Quran, tadabbur requires tools, and if we don't have them, we are in murky waters where we are drawing wrong conclusions from the Quran.
So I would say that's not the case, because tadabbur is not tafsir. Tadabbur is the Quran addresses itself to two types of people. There's verses that are addressed and they're legal, or they're kind of, the complexity has a reason and an output, which is you have to do X or Y. In other words, you have to think. And so a scholar will have to look at a verse like the verse of inheritance, for example, fairly clear, but sometimes not. A verse on marriage, for example, a verse on international law and war and peace. There might be intricacies within that. There might be verses about prayer or Hajj. So there's intricacies in, actually, if somebody says, okay, what if I did this before that? What if I went to Arafat, but I didn't stay until the sun set, and I went to Muzdalifah or straight to Mina? What happens? If the person had access just to the Quran, they could make an answer if they didn't have the hadith, but hadith provide the answer to that. But essentially, hadith, tafsir al-ahkam, which is the whole area of understanding the Quran in its legal context, it requires Arabic, it requires syntax, it requires a deep dive into the structure and things. Tadabbur is different. Tadabbur is, if Allah is saying the same verse, أَفَلَا يَنْظُرُونَ إِلَى الْإِبِلِ كَيْفَ خُلِقَتْ, do they not reflect upon the camel, how it's created? It's not asking you to do a deep scientific analysis. It's just asking you to reflect over desert life, over the sustenance that is given to animals on the very brink and an edge of existence, where they're almost in a state of death, close to death in a desert. But how does creation manage to survive on these extremities? And, looking at the constellations, looking within yourself, looking into the horizon, all these are kullun fi falakin yasbahun. Everything is swimming in its own horizon. Now, you look up the night sky, you see that same thing. The Arabs, when they looked into the desert and they saw a caravan passing by, they would say that the feet or the footprints of the caravan indicates the movement of a caravan through this land. Even after it's passed, you can still see something went through the caravan, this land, this desert. There's the footprints, indicates a caravan having passed through here. And in the same way, the constellations and the stars point towards an entity that could create those. And that indicates towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It doesn't require a deep scientific mind, it just requires reflection. That everything, like, even a basic proof of God's existence, that everything that has a beginning Like anything, think of anything that has a beginning. Your iftar, all of that on the table will have a beginning at some point, somewhere. Everything that has a beginning has a cause. You're causing it, you bring it together, you're making it. And the world, the creation, the whole world as an entity has a beginning, therefore it has to have a cause, which means there has to be a creator. That's a basic thing that human beings can come to understand. So tadabbur, I think the big crime of this age is that we have Muslims that comment on things that they shouldn't comment on, where it's about tafsir and ahkam, halal, haram, kafir, mushrik. We were talking about offline, actually, we were talking about Taraweeh, weren't we? And we were saying, like, in some places, in some countries, you're scared of going into a masjid because you don't know if it's going to be the right sect or whatever. You don't feel comfortable going in. So there's a place where you should be quiet, and that is halal, haram. This person's a good Muslim, that person's not a good Muslim. All these things, leave it to people that ulil azmi min ar-rusul are people that have high elevated status amongst prophets. But there's also people, fas'alu ahla dhikri in kuntum la ta'lamun. Ask people of knowledge if you have no knowledge. So there's people that have knowledge of the intricacies. But tadabbur is just to have common sense reflection. And the result of that reflection won't get you into difficulty. You'll just say, what can happen? I don't think anything can happen. Tadabbur is just reflection over.
So for example, say Shah Waliullah Dehlavi's concept of tazkir bi ala illah, or tazkir, and there is another concept of ayyamillah. Shah Waliullah says there are 5 categories Quran could be understood in, right? Okay. One of them is ayyamillah.
Now, so the historic movement history and events in history that took place, such as Amil Fil or the drowning of Pharaoh, for example, or the Ark and the flood, for example. Yeah, ayyamillah. Yeah, so you can reflect on them, obviously. Yeah.
So we can reflect on ayyamillah, but can we extrapolate that concept into one of the ayyam that we are passing through and say this is ayyamillah?
All right, we understand.
Can last 3 years be ayyamillah? That what we're looking at, what we're witnessing now, today, last 3 days.
Okay, interesting. Ayyamillah actually is to do with major events. So ayyamillah is essentially the life. I mean, history goes through phases, doesn't it? And time moves forward. So each day is a day, isn't it? And each of those days, in some way, is a day of God. It's not outside the sphere of God's influence. But ayyamillah is a special term which relates to historical turning points, instances which are marked, such as the 10th of Muharram is marked before the passing of the Prophet ﷺ, or specifically before the instance of Karbala. It was marked as a day in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had saved the people of the Ark, had saved the children of Israel from Pharaoh. I mean, there was events that took place, and those were essentially marked on that day. So it was a day that you marked. So day of Arafah is also one of the ayyamillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The 10 days of Muharram, the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah, the last 10 days and nights of Ramadan, for example, the 30 days of Ramadan, these are ayyamillah. And this is what Allah says, وَذَكِّرْهُمْ بِأَيَّامِ. Remind people of the days of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because reminding them, it either has 2 functions actually. One is to get them, jog their memory in what happened on those days. Like a group of people that were oppressed all of a sudden were supported and protected by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That is something that is of importance, because the historical event also can transfer into today. So there's that, like the story of Al-Fil as well. The general idea is that, what did we extract from that? We extracted from that the fact that defeat always comes from an internal doubt, which then manifests externally, and an internal external victory always comes from an internal revolution, like an internal change. So we mentioned, what did we? إن الله لا يغير ما بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بأنفسهم. That God does not change the state of a people until they change what's within themselves. If you change what's within yourself, the external revolution will take place, not vice versa. You cannot change the way the world is and expect that then to impact you, because by that time, the world will have gone away with you, and you will not be able to change yourself. You'll be caught up in the way the world works. So that is Ayyamillah. And if you're saying, are these days the days of God? It depends whether God wants you later on to mark them. Like, if you think about it, will this be an event in history when you go back and you'll be reminded of, for example, the treachery of a specific nation or the valor of a specific nation? And it's not necessarily restricted to the prophetic period. It can be later on as well. Like the Battle of Yarmouk, for example, is one of the Ayyamillah. The entry of Umar radiallahu anhu into Jerusalem when they were given the keys to the city was one of the days of God. It's after the time of the prophets.
And this is marked by our own tadabbur.
Yeah, because we think about, what was it about the period of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu that allowed him to enter into the city without any bloodshed? So what was it? What was it about Salah ad-Din Ayyubi that allowed him to lead an army into reconquering or reconquesting Jerusalem and all the other lands that he was able to control? What was it about him? And so we listen and read about his lifestyle, his mind, his thinking, and his values. And in a sense, that's also ayyam, that's history. And so when Shawli al-Dahlawi is talking about at-tathkir bi-ayyamillah, like taking heed from historical events, essentially that's what it is. It's something that exists all through history. Like you could say the fall of the Ottoman Khilafah is also one of the days that God pointed out to us, the treachery of certain groups within the Ummah itself that brought the downfall of the Ummah. Is also a sad event, but it's also one of the ways that we come to know history and the pitfalls of history as well.
So Sheikh, two aspects. One is knowing and understanding the significance of Ayyamillah, the definition of it and what the significance is. And the second part is, while we make history as, this generation and onwards, is there a capacity in history, historical events, to be marked as Ayyamillah? So the first part first, sorry. What's the importance of it? Why are these important, and our responsibility to keep remembering them, commemorating them?
Yeah, so I mean, if you think of if you think of the Prophet Musa alayhi salatu wasalam being told about reminding his community of the days of God, if you just take from that verse, then there's an obvious significance there, which is that they've just been saved from the tyranny of Pharaoh, and they should show thankfulness for that, because at a certain point, the Bani Israel started to go wayward. They started to question the movement in the wilderness. So, for example, has God forsaken us? Why are we not being given access to the Holy Land? And then all the problems that come with that require to be pushed back on. And the way you push back on it is to remind them of the good times. It's like, imagine a couple have a difficult patch in their marriage. A good counselor would say, well, remember the good times. A bad counselor would say, let's dig up the muck and let's see who's got more negative on the other. But a good counselor would say, okay, what was it that made you click at the point that you clicked? And so in history is also a point, okay, what was the point in history where everything fell in place for you as a chosen people? And so you'll have, the flood and the end of the flood, you'll have the destruction of Pharaoh and the indication of God's pleasure towards you. You'll have all these events, and you'll also have, later on in Islamic history, the famous one is Muharram. is contested, and you'll know this very well in the Muslim world, because some people mark it as what, I mean, as Sunni Islam, we consider it to be marked as being a day in which we mark the honoring of people through God's intervention. But also, you know, in the period of Karbala, it became ominous and synonymous with the opposite, which was a day of grief and a day of mourning, because of the martyrdom of Sayyidina Hussein radiallahu anhu arda. So it kind of, so you've got the day, but then you've got contesting over what was significant about it. So for one people, it will be the privilege and honor of a specific person sacrificing everything against a tyrant, okay? And for another group of people, it will be an indication of God having saved a group of people from inevitable destruction, and that's a point of gratitude. So you've got the same event, and you've got this two-sided reading of the event, and it's the same thing now. So I mean, I did a course 2 years ago. Was it 2? Yeah, it's 2.5 years ago, on 3 years now actually, on the fall of the Khilafah.
Yeah,
so 1923. Yeah, so it was 100 years on. So the reason I did it then was because 100 years on, people like to think in terms of centuries, and it marks 100 years from the fall of the Khilafah. So what can we learn, and what can we take away from our experience since that time, the 100 years since the fall of the Khilafah, why it fell, and what we learned from it falling, and how have we managed to learn from it, or have we learned anything from it? So we need, as human beings, we need time, we need space. We need to mark ourselves in terms of time. And this comes back to the idea of Kaaba. We had a discussion a couple of episodes ago. Why do you have to center people in a geographical location? Because human beings by nature are geographical. They're orientated. You're either, when you're speaking to somebody, you don't turn your back on them. So if you're speaking to God, you have to have some kind of directionality to make it meaningful. At a very basic level, even at a very high level, you have to have that. And so it's the same thing with time. You have to mark time. You have to mark points like Ramadan is a time we take a break, and you see people's priorities change. It does disrupt. In a worldly sense, a lot of people's, what we call productivity, but it doesn't affect their spiritual productivity, because they end up nourishing something that's far more important, which is the soul.
Reflecting on various aspects of Surah Qureysh, and kind of linking it with the events described in Surah Al-Fil with Shaykh Ruzwan Muhammad. This is Radio Ramadan. A short ad break, and inshallah we'll be right back.
तस्वीर सीने में मौजूद है जिसने लाकर
Radio Ramadan, reflections with your host Zubair Akram and our respected guest Shaykh Ruzwan Muhammad. Surah Qureysh. Did we go off topic, Shaykh? Will you call it off topic, or is it related?
I don't know. You ask the questions. Just answer the questions.
But it's not supposed to be a Q&A, so it's like, yeah. It's Surah
You're the
Qureysh.
host, so it's up to you. I mean, you're responsible for this. Did you get some complaints?
No. I was just wondering that is Ayyamillah, because it's been bothering me. I actually, the background to this is that we've been covering Surah Fil, and someone discussed this with me. They said, okay, that's in the past, but how about this major event that's happening, which is contested? People say, 7th of October never should have happened. But look what it is leading to. Probably it has formed, it's like a catalyst for the change. Global South being led by China, by Russia, and then there are regional powers emerging like Turkey, Pakistan, Indonesia. And you said as well in a few episodes that there is no opposition other than the Ummah itself. And however fragmented it is, however disconnect it displays between the ruling and the rule and the population. But the ideas, some of the revivalist movements and some of the tall figures have implanted or kind of put a seed. There is a formidable opposition now to the hegemony now. So can we say that we are? Can we start recognizing that these days will be remembered as Ayyamillah? Maybe say in 200 years, 100 years.
Well, that is going to go off topic, isn't it? Because it's on topic if you're talking about the instances that we're talking about, which is like
Quraysh.
the Qurayshi pacts with the empires was a preamble to the Prophet coming, the safety. So you could call that Ayyamillah, definitely. The Am al-Fil and the instance of Abraha is definitely one of those historical instances. So if the person is saying, well, what is the significance of the days we're living through? I mean, history judges that, doesn't it? So that's why I said, the Battle of Yarmouk or the taking of Jerusalem by Salah ad-Din Ayyubi, or the conquest of Constantinople by Sultan Mahmud Fatih. These are considered to be in some way historical because the Prophet mentioned the conquest of Jerusalem as being one of the signs of the end of time. He mentioned the conquest of Istanbul as being one of the signs of the end of time. So it ties in directly with some of the Prophet said. But there's also the aspect of events that prove to be significant. And in the course of our shows, we have kind of mentioned them. I mean, when I was talking about power, I did mention, the way that power has changed over the last probably 5 decades in terms of resources were essentially power. Land was power. Now it's not. It's aerial superiority, and it's also to do with international fiat currency, debt-based economy. That's what dictates what wealth is and power is, and leverage. And the military is insignificant in that sense. I think it's not as important as anything else. But I think if you look back, there are events in our living memory of years. I've mentioned years like 1979 being significant because lots of events clustered in around that time, which we're still living through. Like, for example, it was February 1979 that the Shah of Iran was overthrown, and Ayatollah Khomeini came in on a groundswell of popular support, not necessarily for him, but for the overthrowing of the Shah himself. So that's something that was significant, and the significance of that is it set in motion a much more sectarian-based politics within the wider Middle East, because once you have what's essentially a theocratic state, a state based on first and foremost a specific type of religious adherence, which is 12er Shiism. Obviously, then that came into direct conflict with the type of religious adherence which was prominent in parts of Egypt, and more specifically Saudi Arabia, which was known as the movement of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. So they essentially ended up becoming proxies, states that created proxy warfare, and alliances between states that either allied with Iran or allied with Saudi Arabia. And that played out all the way until very recently. It's only about 4 or 5 years since that hatchet, I think, has been kind of buried with, ironically, the liberalization and abandonment of the movement of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab in Arabia. That is not, Iran didn't forfeit its theological claims, but Saudi Arabia did. But that event itself did create this whole change within the whole Middle East, and also the issue of Palestine as well. So that's a deep issue. That's 50 years of the narrative of, not just Gaza, but Palestinian Authority. I think that's a study that if somebody did that would be very helpful for people to really understand the way that people jockey for, you know, this status of being the defenders of Quds or the defenders of the Palestinian issue. Unfortunately, that's not within the scope of this program. But I think if somebody did that, which is to look at how the Palestinian issue has been essentially subverted by external authorities and powers, that would be a very interesting thing, because then you see the Ayamillah, which, if you want to say that, 1979, that's one thing. Also, the kind of in the Sunni, paradigm as well. You've got the hijacking of the Hajj in that year by extreme Mahdist Ikhwani, not Ikhwani actually, the Saudi Arabian Ikhwani, the Abdul Wahhab's, his kind of splinter groups. That also then affects the way that we look at history, and also the invasion of the obvious one is invasion of Afghanistan, which
Afghanistan, the Soviets
and this whole idea of mujahideen, and a marauding group of people that go from war to war, on the face of it for the sake of God, but on the other side there's obviously destabilizing countries. And Anwar Sadat, I think it was the same year, he was killed as well.
79.
I think 79. After signing the Camp David agreement. So anyway, 1979, that for me is, it brings, and if you don't understand that you don't really understand what's happening now. So I think if you were giving a running commentary of the conflict now, without any deep long-term understanding of what the forces are that are moving it, essentially you're not talking about Ayamillah, you're not talking about deep historical analysis, you're just talking about news cycle. And I mean, I was watching a clip yesterday by somebody I respect a lot. He's now the Chief Mufti of Syria, Shaykh Osama Rifai, may Allah preserve him. He was exiled from Syria here in Istanbul for a good 7-8 years. And he was asked about his opinion on the conflict, and he said, which will be not palatable for a lot of people, but he said, well, we know within our tradition that God will take revenge from one oppressor through another. But after having said that, he said, but we do pray for our brothers in Iran who are not allied with the Sassanids. He said, he actually used the word Sassanid, which is a kind of extreme sectarian forms of Shiism. And so, as Muslim brothers and sisters, that's something that we do pray for them in that situation. But the point being that, your understanding of history will be read based upon your ideology, your theological understanding, your depth of understanding of history and movements, and significance of those, and the posturing of all the parties to represent, X or Y position. So, if this program was a current affairs program, we would do that, but I don't think.
فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ.
Yeah, فَلْيَعْبُدُوا. Here we go. Now, obviously, you're back on track.
فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. And yesterday we touched upon the difference between Ilah and Rabb. Because as I kind of contemplated on this one, that in these sessions, your emphasis on Tawheed has been unparalleled, I would say. I haven't heard from you in many of the episodes before in Reflections. And I still haven't grasped the concept, how Tawheed, the concept of oneness, one God, weaves through these two surahs.
Okay.
So there is Rabb.
فَلْيَعْبُدُوا. Okay. Yeah, فَلْيَعْبُدُوا. This, if I tell you, remember I started, I said, community, what was I talking about? Marketing? Yeah, marketing, call to action. This is the first call to action, isn't it? فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. In the 2 chapters, this is the first call to action, meaning this is the first point that you're actually told to do something, or somebody's told to do something. So, and the interesting, as a side note, is the Quraysh are told to do this indirectly. So it's like the Quran is telling the Quraysh indirectly, فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. It's like the Quraysh is listening to this chapter and the message has been given to the Prophet ﷺ and the people that receive the Quran, which is people that believe in it, who are being told to tell the Quraysh that they should worship God. It's almost like, please pass on this message to the Quraysh, because they were saved from the war elephant and the army, and they were being given such felicity and peace and tranquility and affluence. Tell them that they should worship God. And the idea of worship, again, ibadah, is essentially to show servitude. But, in Surah Dhariyat, was Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, that we've not created humans and the jinn and the humans except to worship. And what Sayyidina Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu said is that worship means to know. So we were created, and the jinn, meaning the two entities that have choice and power to make a decision on something, were created essentially for one thing, which is to worship. And that worship doesn't mean just to bow and to prostrate and to sacrifice for something. It means to know. And so the question is, to know what? Is to know God. Okay, so they're created to know God. Okay, what does that mean? It comes back to this idea of what is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what is the entity that brought everything into existence, which is, and from one perspective, Godhood, meaning when we think of God, when we think of Allah, what do we think? It's in Aqidah, we talk about omniscience, which is knowing everything, omnipotence, which is having all power, omnibenevolence, having absolute care. All these are ideas, and timelessness and things. That's what we think of when we think of Godhead. That is beyond what we can imagine, beyond what we can create, beyond what we can create from our own imagination. But there's other aspects of Allah or God which are related to coming to know Him. And I'll tell you this thing, which is going to be quite interesting actually, if I think about it. Knowing God means to know God when you meet Him. Now that means, what does that mean? It means every single day you meet God, but you don't click that you met God. So you're probably saying, how do you meet God? Sounds at best crazy, at worst heretical. But it means Allah has names, Allah has attributes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has qualities. And those qualities manifest every single day in your life. In fact, you're listening to me, you've met God at least 10 times since this last sentence I've spoken. Because Allah is Al-Muhyi, is the one that constantly re-alivens you through your heartbeat. So Al-Muhyi is the
Allah re-alivens you.
Re-alivens you, meaning, because Muhyi is the one that is constantly at the most molecular level giving you the permission to stay alive. Muhyi is not just like the one that through a miracle brings the dead alive. And it's not even the one that gives life through an embryo. In Aqidah, we understand God to be Al-Muhyi, is the one that constantly creates the systems by which you and everything else that is existent and living and as an animate object stays in the state of living. And if God wanted to pull that away, God would pull it away. So that's the most hidden level. I mean, no one would think of that, but that's it. That every single day you will meet God in one of His names, Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim. So when Ibn Abbas was saying and commenting on the verse, we did not create jinn and humans except to worship, meaning to know. How do you come to know God unless you come to meet Him, unless you come to interact with God, unless you are given opportunities to experience what God has done for you. And so at that point, if you think of these chapters, if you think of Surah Al-Fil, the Quraysh met God through what? Al-Muntaqim, the one that takes vengefulness and takes retribution. Al-Qabid, the one that constricts and decimates.
Quraysh, did they not meet him as Al-Mu'min?
No, the Ashab al-Fil.
Ashab
They
al-Fil,
met
yeah.
him. They saw him basically demolishing the companions of the war
Muntaqim.
elephant through these qualities. So they saw them in the horizons. They were in the mountains around Mecca looking and waiting, and they met God through Al-Muntaqim. They saw him decimating their enemy. They saw him Al-Adl, the just. They saw all these names that they should come to know God through, but also Ar-Rahim, because part of stopping bloodshed is to show the quality of mercy as well. So they met God through mercy. So depending on each person's fineness of reflection and tadabbur and appreciation of life and experiencing and fine-tuning of how they connect with Allah and the world, they will come to know God in every single moment of their life. But at the you talked about Shah Wali Allah Dahlawi and his concept of tazkir bi ayamillah, to take notice and admonition from his historical events. That's when you get the big the big names and the big headlines where you can say, okay, we saw God intervening in situations, and that indicates that we come to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through them. But the headlining events are not when we come to know God. You come to know God in the depths of night when He is Al-Mujib. Ujibu da'wat ad-da'i idha da'an. As Surah Al-Baqarah says, He responds immediately to the person that calls when they call. Now that means to know. You're created to know God.
Ma'rifah.
It comes back to the issue of ma'rifah. So this is why when we talked, I think it was yesterday, when we talked about ibadah, this idea of ma'rifah is essentially deep awareness of your relationship to God. And when God is saying فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ to the Quraysh, God is telling them, let them now come to know their Lord. And when you come to know, you will worship, but come to know their Lord, who's the Lord of this house. So how did He show His lordliness? By protecting them from the army of Abraha, by privileging them, by giving them sustenance and peace, by privileging them, by safeguarding them from famine and a lack of food. All of this preservation should get you to come to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's like at the meta-historical level. That's the level of big events that everybody will look at and talk about the Quraysh and talk about Abraha and talk about Fir'aun and talk about Noah and talk about all these things. But at another level, there is also a micro history, which is you, Zubair, me, Ruzwan, people listening, who on the Day of Judgment, they'll have their own micro history, which is a moment when they gave charity, when perhaps it was difficult for them to give charity, or when they, repressed their anger, when it was easier to be angry, or, all those for them will be the big historical points in their life. Because
they will know God through these events.
They will come to know God and they'll be tested through those events. Like, not every event has to be David and Goliath. Because in some way, you and your nafs is David and Goliath 2.0. It's like, that's the big battle, because in some way, depending on where you are in your spiritual path, Goliath is the nafs. This is why Ramadan is set aside as 30 days of almost like a war of attrition between you and your nafs, to see to what degree you can bring your nafs down on its knees, so that you can then become the David that you are. And so, I mean, when people say these are chapters about historical people, I think they miss the point when God is telling them, worship the Lord of this house. Everybody's being told, you could fill in the story of Abraha and the Fil with an instance in your life where you were safeguarded by God. And you can also change the story of Quraysh and the privilege that they've been given, and the honor they've been given, and the blessings they've been given by your own blessings. And you can then say, فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ, and therefore you as well should worship the Lord of this house. Because it's the same thing. You've been protected in some way. You've been given privilege and blessings in some way, even if you refuse to acknowledge it, you still have. And so that
Sheikh, would it be the case that you are remembering Allah and you are getting to know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through just sitting back and look at your life unfold the way it does?
Mhm.
Because every time it unfolds into the next step,
Mhm.
it's something different. You know, either you know him by being Rahman, or Muntaqim, maybe sometimes.
Mhm.
Sometimes being Hafiz, Mu'min, his Jalal, his Ikram. So all of those qualities, they manifest themselves in our own lives. And if we sit back with sabr, are we getting to know Allah just by sitting back and watch the life unfold and keep connecting the dots?
ليحنك العلم يا زبير.
Allahu Akbar. Okay.
Well done. It dropped.
Yeah.
Is that not what it's all about? I thought that was obvious. Anyway, that's what it's all about. That is exactly what it's all about. You know, if you think it's about anything else, then the Prophet was described as being the person that used to remember God in all of his moments. So this Aisha radiallahu anha mentions this. The Prophet used to كان يذكر الله في جل أحيانه. You know, so he used to mention Allah and remember Allah in all of his states. And it doesn't, I mean, a lot of people think that means you need to fill your time up with La ilaha illallah, la ilaha. So the Prophet did not do that. Okay. So then you're left with, what did the Prophet do? It's that there was never a moment that he lived through except he connected it to God, like to a name or quality of God. Like, can you think of living your day, next day, tomorrow, and at each moment that's some event or anything, like, you know, like there's a whole discussion. I was teaching a section on Sidi Ahmed Zarruq's Qawaid, and there was a section in which he had this discussion about, you know, whether you should mention the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, say Bismillah each time you eat. So, you know, when you take the food and you eat it, you put it in your mouth, you say Bismillah, and then when you swallow it, you say Alhamdulillah. It's something that is known from the Prophet ﷺ that you do at the beginning, you say Bismillah, and then when you finish, Alhamdulillah. It's the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. But there was a whole discussion in which he says that, you know, wherever, you know, the principle is that that food and company are the source of all good and evil. So based on that, so if you eat haram food, it's a source of a lot of evil. If you eat halal food, it's the source of all good. If you have good company, it's the source of all good. If you have bad company, it's the source of all evil. But then he goes on to a tangential point, which is some people said you should do that to the degree that you always say Bismillah at every moment you do it. But then he went back to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. But the thing is, the Prophet, his sunnah was that when he was sitting with people, he used to always converse with them. He used to speak with them. He used to make what we call now small talk, and just, in other words, just being sociable and creating a connection with people. And the thing is, in doing that, he wasn't forgetting God. He was creating, you know, this connection between people that keeps them connected to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it's part of mercy, it's part of compassion, it's part of ra'fa, which is ra'uf, to have connection with people, to show concern for people, to come to know them. And so the Prophet, in that basic thing, would be remembering God. When he was trading, remembering God. When he was in war, remembering God. When he was with his wives or with his children, his daughters, remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At all points, he wasn't sitting with a tasbih saying La ilaha illallah, La ilaha illallah, La ilaha. You know, it wasn't this constant dhikr that was, you know, something that was audible. He never forgot God. Meaning he was constantly registering a name or quality of God that then he responded to. So if you think about it, if you visualize this, now they have these AI, they have these kind of marketing things that they have where they just pop up and then they show you something. Imagine a person who's really connected to their relationship to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you were to watch them and you imagine walking through the whole day with them, and every time something happened, you saw a screen popping up, that person would be engaging with the event and with Allah in a specific way, and they would connect everything back to God. They wouldn't forget God in that instance. So buying, selling, like when you're buying and selling, the buying and selling, God would be part of that contract. So this is why the Prophet used to say that a person should never sell something unless they indicate the shortcoming of what they're selling. If there's an aib, which is, there might be something wrong with what you're selling, you should tell the person that there's this specific thing that it's being sold with, if it's a second-hand thing, meaning you're including God in the transaction. Okay, that is dhikr. I mean, that's why people keep messing up. And somebody was asking me about dhikr and saying, if I do all the adhkar, it takes like 7 or 8 hours a day, and I get really tired and things. I said, well, dhikr is not making numbers. It's not. For some people it is. For some people, they need to break the nafs and they have to do 10,000, 15,000 of whatever. So they have to discipline themselves. But at a certain point, once the alternator in the car, the alternator, don't you?
Yeah.
Once the alternator is fixed, you don't have to keep, charging up the battery.
Yeah.
Do you understand?
Yeah.
And so that's why it comes up, فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. Because if they were aware of what they were doing, if they weren't in a state of ghafla, which is heedlessness, they would have clicked that the Rabb and the Protector and the Merciful and the Muntaqim and all the names of God, they've already known God all through their lives, the Quraysh. And so the point, it comes back to Tawheed, if you asked about Tawheed.
Yes.
So why have you got all these idols in the Kaaba? Because essentially, if you're given a blessing, what did they do? Oh, it's Lat, it's Uzza, it's Manat, it's this idol, that idol. If you want to, even nowadays, there's certain illiterate communities within our own community that will go to the grave of a person and say, oh, I need to go there and we need to ask this person for something. It's all the same thing, which is God not the one that gives? Is God not the one that takes? Is God not the one that allows or does not allow? That's Tawheed. Tawheed is not just about taking people in and out of Islam. And it's not just saying that God is one. It means that your experience with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should be unified so that you come to know God in His names, attributes, and His actions every single moment of your life. So that at a certain point, it becomes natural.
Tawheed al-Rububiyyah in this one. Yes.
Yeah. Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, because Rabbu hadha al-Bayt. But also it gets to the point where it becomes second nature. And the reason why that's important is, like, for ourselves, if it's second nature, if anything happens, the moment it happens, you'll remember God. You won't remember anything else. That you want a car crash, you won't lose hope because the first thing that'll come to your mind is God, is our protector. And whatever's happening is for the best. So you don't go into this state of depression and anxiety and fear because, you come to the point where God will be with you in that situation. It's like the Battle of Badr. مَا رَمَيْتَ إِذْ رَمَيْتَ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ رَمَى. That you did not throw, O Muhammad, when you threw, but rather God threw. Because your dhikr was so pure that God then became part of your actions.
So, Shaykh, what I've learned in the last 10-15 minutes is it's all about always getting ready to meet God, because you do meet Him, the Almighty. You do meet Him, whether you like it or not. You do. Whether you plan for it or you don't, you do. And if you do with preparation, if you do with a desire, that's what this surah is saying. فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. So be ready for a meeting with your Allah.
Yeah, ultimately, yes. But also daily meeting, instantaneous meeting. Like if you get to the point where you are in sync with worshiping God, knowing Him and His attributes, and at a level of your day-to-day life, then the ultimate thing, which is to meet, will be something that you won't be fearful of. It will be something that you will love to do, love to happen, and God will love it to happen as well. Because otherwise, you're just you're going to toil. You're going to like go up the hill in first gear. In the Quran says, "Innaka kadihun ila rabbika kadhan famulaqi." O human beings, you're toiling inexorably towards your Lord, and you will meet Him. Like, you don't have a choice. It's like a conveyor belt. The conveyor belt is going one direction. Time's going one direction. You're not getting younger, and you're going to meet your end. You're going to see the light. You're going to end up having to answer. And so it's a question of whether you come having, synced yourself into that conveyor belt, and you're using the conveyor belt. Yeah, you're using the conveyor belt to your advantage, or you're toiling against it. Like, you're trying to push the other way. So you're trying to get younger. You're trying to run away from your responsibilities. You're running away from your connection to God and the responsibilities that God's placed upon your shoulders. All these things are the same. Meeting God, like even providing for your family or educating or having good akhlaq and good manners, is meeting with your Lord, because that's what's required of you as a servant. And so people, either they rush towards it and embrace it and become the best versions of themselves, or they just put it at the back of their mind. They just think, okay, mañana, I'll do it tomorrow. And that is, and essentially will create what? They'll create this fear, create this anxiety, this depression, or because they're not relying on God. So everything becomes, the thing that I didn't mention is, if you don't do that, every day is a surprise, and not a good surprise. Like, you are going through a roller coaster of emotions. You lose your job, you lose your spouse, you are given $1 million, good or bad. You're just going through roller coasters of happiness and sadness without connecting the dots. And the dots are connected through your Lord. This is the knowledge of God, the ma'rifah, the worship of God, is the thing that creates everything balanced. That if you were given all the wealth in the universe, it wouldn't create this elation and elevation in you, as much as losing everything would not create that depression in you, because you would know that everything comes from God and goes to God. He's al-mani'. He's the one that he restricts you and stops you, and he's the one that gives you. So in both situations, you're meeting God. You're just left with the situation of trying to interpret why it happened and how you should respond to it. Your moral responsibility.
Subhanallah. Is it just my heart is pounding? Subhanallah.
What happened to you today? You fasted?
Allahu Akbar. No, I'm just thinking. It's a novel. It's a novel concept. It's a new concept for me. I'm hoping it. No, this is not bidah hasana. It is that, Subhanallah. Meeting with God is not a bidah. Getting ready for a meeting on not hourly basis, every second of your life. You are meeting with His attributes.
If somebody lives like that, it becomes second nature, and it does have. I'll tell you, I'll have it. I'm not going to say, but it's obvious. Like the change in you as a person, in terms of sustained change. It's not like this yo-yo where you go into one, where people do 1,000 adhkar in a day. Like Ramadan, they're going to do like stay up all night, be like sleep deprived, and shout at their children the next day. That's like, crashing the spiritual car. You have to get to the point where your interaction with people indicates how well you worship and know God. Like, you should know where you are with God depending on how you deal with people, which is from the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. This is why the Prophet said, like, he said, to smile to a person and greet them is sadaqah. Like, what does that mean? It means that you've done what you're supposed to do with the person in total alignment with your relationship to God, because this is what you were supposed to do. Like, to be the best of akhlaq comes from dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you know what you're expected to do at that moment in time. Even with your enemy, you know exactly what you're supposed to do at that moment in time. Not to be vengeful, not to be vindictive, to show the prophetic model, which always brings idfa' billati hiya ahsan, respond to something that's better, not with what they respond with, but something better. Changes everything. And so if people start to do that, the tangible qualitative change in their life will be way beyond anything that you'll ever get from a life coach, like any life coach, to make your life the happiest you ever have. Because you'll be content with everything that life throws you, the good, the bad, and the ugly as well.
So the bookmarks, we leave them until
What was the bookmark?
Bookmarks for tomorrow. Yeah, okay. Moral justice.
Okay.
Justice in peace and justice in war is what Surah Qureysh is all about. Inshallah, tomorrow we will begin with these bookmarks reflecting on Surah Qureysh with Shaykh Ruzwan Muhammad. Coming to the end of the session, very close to Iftar. Please remember us in your du'as while you remember yourselves. Until tomorrow, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
Assalamu alaikum.